technology.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try to move into a topic that I think is rather interesting. And I know you worked a lot with in Spotify as well, who made the journey from going from on-premise to the cloud, which was a multi-year, endeavor and took a lot of time and money and effort, and they did a lot of mistakes, I think, but still, made it. So what would you say? Let's say that we have a company today, some Swedish company that's getting a bit threatened perhaps by Amazon moving to Sweden, and perhaps it's a retailer, perhaps it's some similar company, and they say, we really need to get, data ready now. Should we move to the cloud or not? What's the first answer you would say to that?
Moving to the cloud is for a purely on-premise company that does not have the experience of managing the cloud is a significant undertaking, right? Yeah. And I don't. It took, how long did it take Spotify? A couple of years?
5 years, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
I think they still have some on-prem stuff, but it's
maybe.
So what was the rationale for Spotify to go to the cloud?
Focus. Spotify is very focused on media, period, and audio media in particular.
We don't want to run data centers.
Exactly. So it was a way to focus on what they're good at in their business and so forth. That was a strategic explanation. And running data centers and all of the low-level nitty-gritty stuff has a significant cost, a massive cost in terms of people. And when you're constrained by if you want to grow and you're constrained by people, that is very expensive. I would claim that long term there are also security aspects here.
Benefits.
Yeah, definitely.
To go to the cloud.
Absolutely.
Because it's interesting. Everybody says, "Oh, it's scary to go to the cloud," but the people who know says, "No. This is naive to think you're more secure than a supercenter of AWS or GCP or Azure or."
Yeah, the people that say we need our own data centers because they're secure, then you go and look at their security practices and then you cry a bit.
Exactly.
I think it's going to be, fast forward 10, 20 years, it's going to be completely obvious, and we are going to look at how blatantly naive we were with running our own machines and having these machines that haven't been rebooted in 2 years, right? If you get a foothold in one of those machines, you're in there forever, right? As an attacker, right? Whereas the containers we run in the cloud, they live for hours and then they go down, and so even if you manage to crack something in there, then you're killed after a while. So you get much more information.
So I think this is all interesting because the naivety of IT security, we look at one thing and we look at it's a little like filtering mosquitoes when not really looking at the fundamentals like this.
But coming back to your question, should we go to the cloud? Security is also one of the main challenges, because whereas the cloud can be much more secure than on-prem, the security paradigms and models and techniques and knowledge that you need is completely different. So all of the competence that you have running on-prem is not necessarily valid on
And just for people that don't really understand, what cloud computing is about and what the difference is to actually having your own hard drive you have to manage, or operating system you have to manage and whatnot. Some people, try to describe this perhaps in a bit simplistic way of saying you build different level of abstraction, saying, you don't manage your hardware, you don't manage the operating system, you don't manage the application, and you continuously move up this like ladder of abstractions. Do you think that's a good way, or how would you describe, the move, or what cloud computing is all about?
Yeah, first and foremost, cloud computing is somebody else's computer, right? It's something that you rent rather than you buy. And then there are different ladders of abstraction here. And from the low level, infrastructure as a service, where you have your virtual machines and your networks and so forth, they're virtual, but they work the same. And I've met companies that have a data center in the cloud, they have all of these virtual machines, and then they control the routing with OSPF and standard routing protocols between them. And in a way, as a transition, that might actually make some sense.
But then this is a data center virtualization. This is a data center business case.
Yeah, rent a data center essentially, but that can be one iteration towards going full cloud. At Spotify, we call that the forklift, right? We just took what we have and put it on virtual machines as one step.
Lift and shift.
Exactly. And so let's see, where was I?
Abstraction. What's next?
Yeah, and there are many abstraction levels. Like then there is the platform as a service things. Right? You don't run MySQL yourself. You ask Google or Amazon to run MySQL.
But you code on SQL.
Exactly.
Your app is yourself.
And the APIs are essentially the same. And for these low level things, the only difference, there is no difference as a developer, but there is a difference as an operator, and there's no difference as an application developer, except that you probably are also shifting at the same time to the DevOps mentality, where the developers sort of own the infrastructure. But the difference is in the control plane, because instead of wiring physical things, you wire things with API calls to the cloud, and you use tools like Terraform or Pulumi to sort of wire things up instead. And that is a significant difference in terms of how you operate things, and also in terms of security, because these control planes that are given by the cloud are very tightly controlled, and some of the things that you can do with them, you had to do over the standard network in your on-premise environment. So you would have to SSH into boxes and so forth. And that is much less secure than using the cloud's control plane to control them instead of sharing the control and the data plane.
So the cloud is more than just having or not having to manage the hardware. It's actually also managing other things like the software as well, the operating system.
Yes, and then there are higher layers.
So now we are IaaS,
exactly.
PaaS, and let's now go to SaaS.
And then we have container as a service as well, where you just ask a container to run somewhere, and then a function as a service, which is in a way to resurrect Java beans, or stored procedures, and then at the top you sort of have the software as a service, which G Suite and so forth, which is completely non-technical. And then there are hybrids here as well.
This is an interesting question, and of course we know there are a couple of leading cloud providers today, and they're clearly leading. I mean, there are many of them, but I think there are 3-4 American ones and a couple of Chinese ones, and there are a large number of others. But do you know of any kind of European cloud providers that we have today?
There's Amazon, there's Google, and there's Microsoft, and then there's nothing, right? And even if you go to the sort of the second tier far below, I don't know what Alibaba has, but I think that's impressive. But otherwise, it's all American. Right?
Do you think that's a problem?
Yes.
Why?
Because, to be honest, we are completely dependent on cloud on these major cloud providers today. If we were to not use them, we are at a significant disadvantage
to the rest of the world,
to competitors that are in the cloud. In particular, if you're doing high tech or startups and so forth. And there is no cloud provider from a European perspective, trustworthy democracy and justice system today. And I mean, we've seen, if you look at the democracy index, the US has been steadily falling there, and we have the privacy shield that was considered not new now with the Schrems 2 case.
So what is the privacy shield? So what is that all about, and what does it really mean for everybody who's using American?
Good point. So GDPR puts a number of requirements on how you handle personal data, right? So it allows you to store data at other providers. Then if I have a company and I take your data to do something, maintain your Tamagotchis or whatever, then I am the data controller. I have a relation with you. And I can use other companies, and they are the data processors. For example, I can store...
so we are referring actually to GDPR roles now. Data controller, data processor.
Exactly. And these... And I make, by taking your personal data, I make some commitments to you, right? I make some commitments that I will treat it securely and not allow anybody else except my data processors, which I enumerate, to handle these data. And I make a commitment that if you want to delete your data, I will go to wherever it's stored,
and I have processes to do it within a certain amount of time.
Exactly, and so forth, right? And that means in relation with my data processors, I must be able to enforce them not to share it with someone else and to delete it and so forth. Now, if we're here in Sweden and this is a data center company in Sweden, everything is fine because they're under Swedish law, and any European Union company, this is fine because they all respect this law and so forth. But after the Patriot Act in the United States, the US basically says that US security interest trumps these things, right? And then there was an agreement called the Privacy Shield, which stated that all data under the GDPR essentially is we will respect those laws, right? Even if you store these this data with an American company, we will respect these things. And now with the recent case that's called Schrems 2, I believe Max Schrems is a German privacy enthusiast, I think. It was found in EU court that this is insufficient. The guarantees that the Privacy Shield gives, along with the US legal system, the US jurisdiction, is not sufficient.
And when was this case published? This is like a month ago?
Something. Yeah. So it's very recent. So right now everybody's like ducking their heads into the sand. And pretend that it didn't really happen. But long term, this is not sufficient, right? Either the US jurisdiction will have to change so that they prioritize the...
They need to respect, in some ways, European law if they want to be providers to Europe.
Essentially, yes. So, and sort of promise that the NSA will not go and look at your data without due process, basically. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
So let's flip it. What will it take, or what would be the smartest strategy to get a solid European cloud provider? How would we go about fixing that?
I am afraid that I don't have an answer. To create something that compete with the three major providers is extremely difficult, right? It requires huge
let me dig a bit deeper into that
forth.
question then, because one way to talk about this is to say you can do a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. And what I mean with that is basically top-down means you do the Chinese way, basically saying the government saying, decide exactly this is the way it should be done, and you pour money from the government into building up an infrastructure or whatnot. Or you can take a more bottom-up approach saying you have the companies and they will actually build up something, and you will rely on the market that they would actually come up with some kind of solution that works for it. What would you say? This is a difficult question, of course, but what would you think would be a good way in Europe to actually have, at least at some point in the future, some cloud provider that is getting closer, at least, to the top cloud providers?
Yeah, I don't think a top-down approach is viable. I think there will be attempts at this, but shaking up vast volumes of money, I think, is possible. But shaking up the competence to build such an organization, both in terms of leadership and technical, and then get the trust to actually get the volumes of customers that you need, I don't see that happening.
What's the problem?
Well,
competence.
Yes, on so many levels, and an understanding of how much we don't know and don't understand about how the cloud providers actually work and what they have inside that enable these capabilities. I've met lots of people that think, say, how hard can it be? Or we have a good startup here. If just give them a bit more money, they will create something fantastic. And I was like, you are so many levels down on ignorance, right? It's not only that you don't know what it's about, you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know how to figure out what it is that you don't know.
I think this is an important point. People think that we can just build up an infrastructure in Sweden by having a cluster of some machines, and you have some GPU machines, and then we have a cloud in Sweden, and awesome. And they don't really recognize, right, all the software and levels above that is necessary to come even close to what the cloud providers have today, right?
Yeah.